Everyone loves talking about innovation until it's time to actually fund it, build it, scale it, and let's not forget, turn it into revenue. Today, we are diving into the real behind the scenes journey of how emerging technologies move from R&D experiments to revenue driving products. Joining me today is Farah Ali, VP of Technology Growth at Electronic Arts, former startup CTO, investor, professor, and a leader who's worked across some of the biggest names in tech from Microsoft to eBay. Whether it's driving grassroots innovation, advising deep tech startups, or teaching future founders at the University of Washington, Farah has been hands-on with the full innovation journey. Welcome to the show, Farah.
Thank you for having me, Rabia.
Well, we'll dive in with a bit of a reflection on your personal side of the journey. Let's start with the non-LinkedIn version of you, Farah. When someone asks you what do you do for a living, be it at a barbecue party, how do you answer that?
I would say right now I pretty much feel like a full-time mom all the time. I have two girls. My older one just finished her first year of high school, ninth grade. So that was quite a journey. And then I have a younger one who's just starting middle school. I think when it comes to my professional career, what I say is that I run a team at Electronic Arts that really focuses on how do you take future tech, emerging tech, find a way to apply it to how we build interactive entertainment. That's one part of my charter. Like I run a research team called Seed. The other two parts of my charter are around how do we find the connections with external tech. So building a partnership with big tech, with startups, with academia, so that we can collaborate across what's happening, what's breaking, building research together. And then, if we find something that's really exciting that could add potential value as an acquisition or as an investment, then kind of looking at that. But the biggest part of my remit, the more hands-on part of my remit is really around the research and applying, looking at generative AI, for example. We do things like how do you take actors' recorded speech and generate lip sync and facial animations from that. So something that you can really apply to any number of games.
While I was, going through your bio, so for you've done a degree in maths, computer science, then you traversed into gaming, to M&A, to startups, to teaching. How did that career path happen for you?
I think starting out, it was more of a process of elimination. Like I kind of was more sure about what I didn't like, as opposed to being really clear or like super passionate. And then, somewhere along the way, I just really realized I enjoy technology in general a lot. I like learning about it. I like, doing new things with it. When I was actually starting out in my degree and starting to do like more experiential hands-on projects, that's when you actually get a sense for it. I think the academic piece of it is just academic and it's very hard to understand how you can apply it. So when I got to actually do applied work, I got really excited about it because, I can create things from scratch and I can build ideas from scratch. So it's actually a very creative process. So that's kind of, I think, how I got into it. And then I think doing a degree in math or CS, math teaches you, abstract thinking, right? You think about computational thinking, abstract thinking, you look for patterns. At computer science is much more practical. How do you take this idea and create something? So practical, scalable solutions. So together, both of those kind of grounded me into how do I break complex problems into simpler parts and then actually create some practical outcomes.
So I believe that you still geek out on the math problems, probably with your kids now.
Yeah. But now it's not as exciting. Now it's more frustrating trying to explain someone how to do something who doesn't want to listen to you.
Oh yeah, that the motherhood can be difficult, I believe. Learn from my own mom. All right, Farah. So if we put a more light on the growth mindset, you left EA, built a startup, became a founder, and then came back to EA. What pulled you back, and what's one thing that startup Farah taught to corporate Farah that she didn't know before?
Yeah, I think lots of things, right? I think it's been great to have had like the high growth big company experience and the scrappy startup experience because as a founder in a startup, because I was a co-founder as well as a CTO, you really learn how to lead with urgency, but with clarity, right? And you don't have resources, so you just have to be very scrappy. These are skills that are just critical at enterprise scale too, right? But the good thing is that you have more resources at your disposal. So you can have that clarity and the urgency, but you don't have to be as scrappy. So you can really approach a big company challenge with this builder's mindset, take all the good things, prioritize what really matters, the fail fast, like how do you try something and then shut it down very quickly if it's not working? How do you empower kind of smaller teams to move like startups, give them ownership, give them autonomy. And then it also deepened my focus and purpose. Like, how do I make sure that everything that's happening ties back to real impact? Because you can't just experiment and test things in a startup. Everything that you do has to have a meaningful output in a short amount of time. So I think that piece was the most critical. How do you look at everything to make sure all initiatives tie back to real impact? Because at a big enterprise, sometimes, there's lots of initiatives going on that feel like they're dragging on forever, that don't really seem to have an end goal. So I think that part really, really helped shift my thinking.
Was there like one career mistake that you were actually grateful for in that time?
I think like lots of career mistakes. I think one of the big ones, hiring. I think this idea that A players hire A players is super critical. And, the minute you hire in your leadership chain a B player, you're going to start hiring C and D players. And that sort of, the impact of that, the cascading impact of that is way worse. One bad hire can outdo three great hires. And so you really have to think about that. It can be about culture. It can be about how they create a toxic workplace. It can be just about how, they're unmotivated, so they're dragging everyone down, or they're just someone who don't believe in your mission. And that can be the killer, right? Like, especially when you're in a mission-driven startup and you have people who really don't see eye to eye with your mission, they sort of bring everybody down with their kind of negativity. So I think hiring is a big one, and it's not easy. It's not easy to find the right person, like from the technical skills to like the fit and the behavioral skills. So just getting really great at identifying good talent, I think is a super secret thing. I think the second is, not always checking assumptions or not always clarifying assumptions. So, with that urgency piece, just going forward, trying to do something, and then later on realizing that you didn't have all the information, or you just made a lot of assumptions that you should have checked back and said, hey, I thought you meant this. Is that actually what you meant? Because you may still be driving for outcomes, but, you could drive for the wrong outcome. So I think those are like just two basic things.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So, another important facet of your life, that, you've been a professor and also a startup advisor. So, how does teaching entrepreneurship to students change how you show up as a leader at EA?
I think the best thing about that is, you're talking to people and working with people who have kind of fresh eyes on problems every day, right? So, I'm meeting someone who is kind of not jaded or is not sort of has that baggage of years of experience to look at a problem in a very specific way. They are looking at it from a new way. And so I think when you have a lot of those interactions, you're building that mental flexibility and you're bringing that back to work and you're bringing that back to how you approach problem solving. So something that you may be looking at to approach a very specific way, and then you're like, oh, okay, maybe let me change my frame and start thinking about this in a different way. I think that's been like the one biggest.
No, no, great. So Farah, now let's move to, a bit more into the topic from concept to scalable impact. In your experience, what's the most common myth about how emerging technologies move from R&D to actual revenue at scale?
So the first thing is that, you think that, you have an idea, you need to get funding, and then you can just go and get it done. I think that the real thing is that you actually need allies and you need champions. Nothing kills innovation faster than having this lack of allies and lack of champions, right? So you have to find ways to work within a tight budget, but you can do that. You can do tight timelines and tight budget if you have a strong advocacy, if you have leadership pushing for that idea, right? If you have everybody sort of understanding that what you're trying to do is hard, that it's not always going to succeed, and that they have your back if something doesn't work. But without that passion, without those passionate people inside the organization backing the idea, driving and defending the innovation, a big budget won't even get you far, right? So it just means that you may spend multiple years on kind of a dead end problem. So I think one is that. The second is that, how do you approach buy-in? Like when you're doing a startup, you have to go talk to a lot of investors, have talked to a lot of customers all the time, right? And, I would talk to, and by the way, I was a CTO, but my biggest job was sales. That was a big learning for me, and it wasn't something I was very comfortable with. I eventually realized it wasn't something I enjoyed a lot. But you realize that as the founding members, even I would say the first 10, 20 people, they're your chief sales people, because you're talking to customers all the time and trying to, sell them your product, but also trying to understand what they want. And so you need to be able to get that buy-in across the investors and the customers. Similarly, in a large enterprise, you have to be really good at building relationships, about communication and collaboration. So you can build that buy-in across this large swath of people. You have to involve key stakeholders in the beginning, listen to their perspectives, align the project goals with everything that matters to them, because this is how you build trust. And if you don't do that upfront and you can't show them how the initiative supports their success or helps them achieve their goals or create the shared ownership and momentum, they are going to create blockers for you later on, right? And so I think those are kind of some of the key things I would think about. And then I think just execution, right? You can get stuck in analysis paralysis and endless decks of how to do stuff versus sort of like, okay, as long as it's not a one-way door, it's a two-way door. You can take a decision, even if you go down the right path, you can change it. At some point, you sort of have to get rid of the discussion and just start execution on the thing, because the best way to figure out what you're doing is right or not is getting something in front of your customers, getting feedback and iterating, right? Like software development is in essence a process of iteration. And so I think trying to, making perfect become the enemy of the good can have you have setbacks.
I was listening to your Redis podcast where you talked about the role of real time and historical data in decision making at EA. When you're evaluating whether an emerging tech idea is ready to scale, how much of that decision comes from data signals versus instinct and experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely a mix. I think when you are starting out, you definitely want to have a lot of data around things like, why are you doing this? Who are you building this for? Getting a lot of qualitative data as well, right? Like you can do focus groups and you can put things in front of your existing alpha or beta customers and get some feedback, but real quantitative data, right? Like, so it's like, is this moving the needle? Are people actually going to the thing? So for example, in gaming, we do play tests. And what we do is when people are playing, we actually get their consent to, when there are cameras on each screen, and we can actually get all kinds of biometric information from them. And we're basically instrumenting everything that they're doing. So for example, if I'm a level designer and I've built, a building, and then it's meant to go through it, and you're meant to go to every level and do certain things. But if I see the majority of the players are going around the building and they're, just trying to avoid it, my learning is the data tells me, just remove that building, or, you're trying to build the game a certain way, but that's not how the customer is experiencing it. So go and make that change, right? So when you're actually in the process of active building, that's when that quantitative telemetry really, really matters, because people may say one thing, they may say, oh, I love the design, I love the architecture, but then that's how they are using it as true, right? So just like we say, sales is the biggest indicator of whether you have a good product or not, right? People may say whatever, but if they're not buying it, if they're not willing to spend their money, that's telling you something. So I think, and then there's the research piece that you do beforehand. There's the quantitative metrics that while you're building, and then once you've launched it, once you're in live service, you need to have a few clear signals that tells you when something is either horribly wrong, slightly wrong, or can be ignored. And those could be things like, are your daily active and weekly active users, are they at the level that you think that they need to be? If you're seeing a dip beyond a certain amount, for example, is there an incident happening? Is the server down? Or is it just that, maybe in that geography it's bedtime for people, so they're actually tapering off the game or whatever, right? How much do they spend per person? What is their customer sat score? So you're looking at some things in live that are very important as well. So each phase of the life cycle requires you to look at different types of qualitative and quantitative data to make different kinds of decisions.
So Farah, where do most promising ideas actually get stuck, on the way to market? Is it usually the budget, as per your experience, the timing, internal alignment, or just plain organizational inertia?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think I would say there's it depends answer, right? It depends a lot on your culture, the kind of company you are, the kind of budget you have. I think when you're a public company, you have the reality of shareholder value, and showing value every quarter is very, very real. And so, being able to balance with that is very important. I think generally, good ideas can come from anywhere in the org, right? So the first thing would be like, do you have a mechanism for bubbling up good ideas, right? You may have somebody really low down in the chain who has no agency to share that idea with you. So how are you enabling people to bring those ideas, right? Sometimes you may have those people, but not the right leadership to bubble up that talent. So are there other mechanisms outside of just the leadership that you have that? So we, for example, have innovation weeks. We have the science fair at EA that we run once a year, where anybody in the company can come. I actually run that out of a team called What If, and anybody can pitch their idea, and they have a working prototype, and they come and talk about it, and we record all of the sessions, and it's in a searchable index, so anybody can go and look at the last X years of great ideas and mine through that. So there's no dearth of of good ideas. So different companies can do different things. That, people used to have these whatever message boxes outside, their leader's office where you could put in a good idea or a good suggestion or comment. So I think the first thing is figuring out how do you make sure you get all the ideas from the grassroots level in an organization, and how do you give people that autonomy or that confidence that they can put that forward. The second is like, how do you take an idea that's good and go from an experiment to like an actual business case, right? Because that's the value of the idea. It's about moving the idea from testing, taking it as a potential serious business opportunity, which means you have to do some evaluation of the commercial viability. So, the way that we think about it from a research perspective is, you have this initial phase of exploration and you have to have some time box around that because that can go on forever. So figure out an early exploration to see even the practicality of the idea. And then when you're out of that, you're like, okay, let's see now if I can find one use case to pilot this, right? So you kind of try this out, you build an early pilot. Maybe it's actual working code, maybe it's, mock-ups, maybe it's something else, depending on what your product is. Maybe if you're in the business of, if you're a bakery and you have an idea for a new, whatever kind of cake, it's like, okay, try to bake 2 or 3 iterations, have some people try it out, give feedback, go back to the drawing board, right? And so kind of once you're done with that exploring and you're out of that discovery mode, then you need to go and look at, okay, this could be a good idea. We have people who like it, but does that mean that it's worth pursuing? Can it scale? Can you actually make money with it? So you then have to gather evidence around the value add in terms of scale and commercial viability and what the ROI on the investment could be, right? And then when you look at that and you say, okay, yeah, it could, but maybe the market, the TAM is only going to be the small number. And so you're not ever going to be able to scale it out to anything big. And then you decide that, okay, maybe this just is a good idea, but it's not something that we want to do at enterprise scale. Or you're able to say, oh yeah, we can imagine a large target addressable market, and we think we can start with a smaller, but we can come up with a plan for how to resource it, how to scale it. And so then you kind of work in that direction. But you have to sort of have this, you explore, then you validate with the pilot, and then you sort of look at okay, what is that path to scale? And then what's the path to sustain, right? Because everything you do eventually becomes tech debt or a thing that you have to maintain and support. And so you have to have a plan for doing that, because the teams that are then going to go and explore further need to go back to doing that, not get stuck in this cycle of, scaling and sustaining.
So, back when you started your own startup, was there a particular approach that you went by for getting buy-in, across stakeholders?
I think, the first thing was when we were starting out, we had an idea. And that's about it. It was me and partner. And so our first thing was like, okay, how do we, do we want to go and bootstrap this, start this ourselves without taking any funding, with our own free time and our money? And we decided that we didn't want to do that we wanted to take capital. So the first set of people we had to convince were venture capital folks, right? And so we went about it in a very sort of strategic way of, okay, who are the best VC firms that fund our kind of idea, right? So kind of created our list, then started looking at, okay, who do we have in common? Do we know anyone? Can we get a warm intro? And then we kind of went down the list of like 15 plus VCs, right? And so we had our pitch deck to start. And then the first time that we did the pitch, one person would be doing the pitch, the other person would be watching the room, looking at the feedback, taking notes, jumping in to help elaborate a point or answer questions. And we'd go back, we'd discuss it, we'd tweak the deck, we'd see what didn't land well, and we tweak. So by the time we had the 6th or 7th call, we were much better, much sharper. We were able to tell our story better, because it's really all about storytelling, right? How are you connecting with your audience? Are they getting your story? We could tell like then in the first, 1 minute of the conversation that the other side gets it and they're excited, or we're saying, oh, they're just phoning it in because they get it, but they kind of don't care about the idea. But I think that going back, iterating, like never thinking that your pitch is done, you have to constantly work on it, and you have to take that feedback as like valuable gold, like those sitting in those meetings and getting that, even that how people were reacting to it, physically, was very helpful for us to go change some of the language we were using, some of the graphs we were using, like never use pie charts. Nobody likes pie charts, like just things like that and so, we were able to crystallize our story, refine our story, and then get our first yes, then get our second yes. So then we were able to get, our first check into, once we get our lead investor, then we could find, much more easily second and third investors as well.
You've also worked with lots of startups trying to partner with EA. scale, right? So, what's one mistake you see over and over when early stage founders pitch enterprise buyers?
I think, my opinion, I think there's multiple things there, but I think the biggest one that I would say is you try to pitch your product and you try to say like, my product is amazing. We built this thing. It has these 200 features. It uses AI. It uses big data. It uses state of the art tech. And what you have to understand is you're talking to someone who has a real business problem. They're not looking for you to sell your product. They're looking for a solution, right? And so I think having that mindset of like pitch your solution, not the product. Don't try to wow them with like, here's my features, here's whatever. I'm an amazing tech person, so I build this. Don't lead with your tech, right? Forgetting to connect stuff to real pain points inside the company or with the investor, with your customer is what I think kills the pitch. So you have to really go in with like this deep customer empathy. Like, what are their pain points? What keeps them up at night? What's a painkiller versus a vitamin, right? It's like if you have a headache, you are going to take something for it versus like, yeah, I know I should be having more vitamins. It's nice to have a supplement. I don't always remember to have it, right? I don't see the urgency of that. So understanding that and making sure that you are speaking to them about what's important to them and not selling your product and selling the solution. And any large organization, for example, an enterprise, they're not really looking for cool demos. So, same with VCs, they've seen it all, right? They've heard it all. So they're looking for strategic alignment. They're looking for like, is it easy to integrate? Is there a clear return on investment? We, the builders, understand their priorities and their constraints. Do we understand that we may have to go and build some stuff custom for it to work? Like, we may have like a really great pipeline to solve problem X, right? Let's say that it's a tool that takes their code and optimizes it to run at a much lower latency, right? And everything about this tool is awesome and we show it end to end. But if it doesn't integrate very easily into their existing systems, into their build systems, into their, source check-in systems, and then they have to do a lot of extra work to do that, they have to understand why, what's the benefit, right? So you come in with, and this is amazing because, we have this very flexible ways to integrate with your existing pipeline. It's very pipeline agnostic. Here's how you plug it in, so you have to go tell that value story. So yeah, innovation doesn't just speak for itself. Just because you did something cool doesn't think that everybody will automatically see it. You have to make sure that you are clearly showing the business results that you can get with it, that you're empathizing with your customer and they see how you align with their strategy, so that right incentives both sides.
Yeah. So, you sort of did hint upon it previously in our conversation as well. But for the leaders at big companies listening to this conversation, what's your playbook for keeping innovation moving, fast enough so it doesn't get buried in meetings, committees, or endless stakeholder reviews?
I think sometimes we mistake that, innovation or working like a startup means that things have to be fast. Right? You shouldn't mistake agility for being scrappy and startup-y, right? Big companies often try to act like a startup, how they think a startup should be. They'll say we'll have a pilot team, we'll cut this process and all of that. Whereas maybe the underlying issue is that, they have these big teams with like hierarchical structures. And so if you kind of go do this other thing, but you haven't empowered your teams, you haven't empowered people to make decisions on their own, to shift decision-making more down to the team rather than it's always has to go all the way up to the top. You have to pitch to one person and they're the bottleneck. You're still not going to be agile because you're going to have to go back and get a yes for every single thing. And so how do you set up your teams? How do you create that autonomy? How do you empower teams to shift the decision making more down to the grassroots level? I think is very important. The true startup agility comes from ownership, right? I feel a deep ownership of the thing that I'm building to the point where something goes wrong, I feel personally responsible for it. So I feel that pain of my customer and I feel that ownership of that this is my company, I've built it, I need to do the best job. And then trust. There has to be this trust on all sides, right? You want to get this done, you've got the right people now, you let them do their work and get out of their way and leave the door open for mistakes, right? But trust that they will correct it. And then that bias for action, right? There has to be a strong bias for action everywhere, not just the people executing, but all up the chain, right? So if you have leaders who are like, okay, it's a great idea, but show me more data, give me this, tell me that, convince me, looking for that perfect plan before any code can be written, that's just going to kill your innovation right there, right? And so it's not just about moving fast, but it's about learning fast, it's about failing fast, and it's about having the culture change that goes with it. So the rituals of a startup it's not just theater, right? You're not just creating this theater within an enterprise, which I see happen, but you're truly pushing for a transformation. And so you are changing all the rules around how you do innovation.
Yeah. So, in your career, was there a time or, a moment when there was a certain idea that was brought to you and where, you could clearly see through that this has real potential versus this sounds exciting, but sort of won't survive first contact with reality? And how did you sort of navigate through the feedback process of it?
So it's a hard lesson, but not every great idea or not even every good idea will get immediate support or will actually see the light of day. And that's okay, right? I think innovation requires that patience and perseverance. So that's the one thing that I think I would say, to someone pitching to me is like, what you're going through and having to kind of go through the hoops to actually pitch your idea is part of the process where you actually learn the persistence. You actually take the feedback and you go back to say, okay, I now can talk about this in a way that aligns better with how the company's strategy is. So you have to balance that, pushing forward with knowing when to pause, when to pilot, when to manage expectations differently. Again, the biggest reason why I think some of these ideas fail or don't get the support is because, you've not been able to tie the R&D thinking with real business impact. So when you're talking to business leaders, if they're thinking about the business and they can see you're focused on clear goals, they don't see the clear measurable outcomes that you're going to look at, you're not really bridging the gap of sharing your idea with how does this solve a real business problem or how does this create real value. It's just never going to come to pass because the people you're pitching to are going to be mostly business leaders, not your tech leaders. They're not going to be the product people even, right? And so they're thinking about the customer, they're thinking about the bottom line. You're thinking about the technology, you're thinking about cool innovation. You have to tie the work that you're doing to what is our company's, North Star, what is important for us this year and the next year, how is what I'm doing going to really help add significant value to the bottom line in the long term? Because I think that's the other piece of it, right? You could do something and it could be very short term, but like how is this creating value in the long term for us to actually back this with resources? And how is this balancing the customer needs along with the company priorities? So those are, I think, the lens where a lot of the people that you're pitching to, or like even when people are pitching to me, that I'm looking at it. And so, yeah, it kind of sucks to be the idea killer. People come up with some great ideas. And I think the challenge really is people get so tied up with their own idea. They get so hung up on it. They get so married to it. Like it becomes all about the idea. And it's like, it's about the customer. It's about the problem you're trying to solve. It's always about that. And so, yeah, it's never easy or pretty, but I think that's the thing you have to do for the business is you can't waste your time and resources on doing things that are not going to add value to the bottom line.
Yeah, because, I think that people get more emotional about things rather than seeing it from a rational point of view. So that could be even, difficult to be navigating being in a leadership role because you don't want to kill dreams or hopes eventually. But then, it's at times really hard to get across the idea. For now, we'll be talking, a bit about women in STEM leadership and the idea of giving back. So you've held leadership roles and been the only women in rooms in tech more than once. What's a leadership philosophy you've built from those experiences?
I think probably even going back to, you've done a degree in CS and sort of even in those rooms, there was very few women in your classrooms, in your project. And so I think just kind of the persistence that requires to stick around. And when you don't see role models or you may not get the right kind of support, I think similarly, you have to put in a lot of situations or you see a lot of things where you really have to develop your confidence very deeply. You have to be very sure about who you are and what you want. And so I think that's been something that I've been able to do because of being in those places. That's been very helpful overall in my life, my career. The ability to advocate for yourself, to speak up, I think that's something I think is a huge thing. I actually really work on that with my daughters, just from this stage to helping them, when they're unhappy about classes going or a grade, like don't call me. I'm not going to come talk to your teacher. You go figure out how you talk to people. How do you solve that problem, right? So being able to speak up for yourself and advocate for yourself in a respectful manner with data is very, very important. So I think that's been something, especially when you're uncomfortable, right? So how do you speak up for yourself when it feels uncomfortable and do it in a way that you're not burning any bridges? I think that's very important. You learn how to be clear and assertive. You do that in a way where you're still not losing empathy. You're still holding on to that authenticity, that humanity, but you're also like, I'm no nonsense. Like, I'm here to work, I'm here to, do a good job, I'm here to be heard. And, I'm not just going to kind of go along with things because I have a mind of my own and I have ideas of my own that I think are equally important. And I think that the thing that a lot of people miss out, especially young people, building strong relationships. Life is a game of relationships, and, being able to connect with people on a personal level so that they understand you. Like, once you and I have talked and let's say we've had a friendly chat, the next time we have a meeting where you disagree with me, it'll be very hard for you to be mean to me. It'll be very hard for you to raise your voice against me, right? So
Yeah.
it's really just even about that, like normal human psychology, getting to know people, being nice to them. Like, they'll have a hard time being nasty to you. You know what I mean? So most people anyway, right? And and people, everybody wants to come and have autonomy, have fun. So like, if you're working with someone and you're enjoying yourself, that actually enhances the experience for everyone. So it's actually a win-win. And then I think finding mentors, like learning early enough that like, who are the people in the room who kind of see something in you or want to be your ally. And so being able to have that relationship with them, having them, as sounding boards, when you're in a situation, you're like, am I crazy? Can I go talk to this person who has been in this situation or was in the room, and like just checking in and knowing, okay, no, I'm not crazy. The way that I'm perceiving this is actually how it is, and it shouldn't be. That helps. So yes, I would say like just that confidence and clear and assertive, communication, the ability to speak up, the ability to build relationships and have mentors. And then finally, I think resilience, right? How do you navigate setbacks? How do you navigate uncomfortable situations without losing focus? How do you stay focused and not get emotional about things? I think these are all just great life skills, not just work skills.
Yeah. So, for young women in STEM, what's an underrated advantage they actually have but do not realize?
I think kind of a little bit going back to the previous question is, if they're in STEM, they've already kind of been through probably a lot of setbacks, a lot of situations where they've been the only, or people have either directly or through like passive aggressive ways let them feel like they're not enough. And so somewhere they've already started cultivating this, how do you deal with that sort of behavior? Why do I, get all of this negative feedback and still go and still like study and still ace my test, right? So something about that they're already building without realizing, without giving it a name. They're already building those behaviors and that mindset. So being aware of it, being conscious of the fact that like you have these tools that you can tune out certain people, you can tune out certain situations, and just go and focus on what's important, what you need to get done, and go get that done. I think that's a very important kind of hidden talent that I think all of us people in STEM have, and that we should kind of double down on. And I think the second is, because you're in that area, I think we naturally have a better ability, I feel, for problem solving and for kind of data informed thinking. And so that's our advantage in leadership too, because you can, once you have great problem solving skills, you see problems everywhere that you could solve, and you're not just going by gut feel. You have this inbuilt mechanism of like, okay, but what does the data tell us? Is this actually a problem? How big is the problem? So I think that's a hidden advantage as well. And I think that ability helps you get even more confident then, right? So it's this great virtuous cycle of like, oh, and I'm good at this. I do this. I actually have great outcomes. That helps me build my confidence, making decisions based on facts, getting that feedback, which is, getting negative or positive feedback is also helping me with my confidence. It can be really powerful when leading teams. So I think, and that really, all of these qualities then lead into very effective leadership, right? If you have all of these things. I think the third I would say is, if you've figured out the ability to be the calm in the storm, right? And when everybody else is losing their mind, or again, when you're in situations where, it's maybe combative or difficult, but you're still able to be calm and composed and get your stuff done, that's a really, really important skill for leadership, right? Because a lot of the times the leader is the person that people look at to sort of just be that guiding star when things are rocky, and so if the person who you're looking at is panicking and out of control and yelling and crazy and, changes their mind from one day to the next, that means that just puts everybody in this weird emotional like roller coaster, right? So
Yeah.
being that person who can like hold the fort, so to speak, is super important. So I think that's a pretty important skill.
Yeah, no, these were some of the great insights that you shared. You've also co-founded Pakistani Women in Computing. What was the tipping point that made you say, okay, this needs to exist, this problem needs to be fixed, and I'm going to make it happen?
Interesting. I think like 2017 or 2018, I don't know kind of what exactly was was the thing that, poked the bear. But, I just had always seen in the US a lack of representation of women, Pakistani women. And then even when I was back when I was in Karachi and, when I was interning, there was a lack of women, even STEM. I think there's more in Pakistan, in fact, now than there are here. So, and I went to school with a bunch of these women, and I knew a lot of these women. Like all the people at the top of my class was always some girl that I knew, right? It was always my friend Sanya or my friend Sana. And, these were the people that you would go to get help with a question, or you'd be like, please be in my group project because I know I'll do well, right? Like, so
Yeah.
I knew all these people who were way better than me at math and science, and they were just the top of their class, and they went on to college and were at the top of their class. And I'm like, where are they? Why are they not here? Why are they not represented? So I just started kind of having that nagging feeling. And so I just thought that maybe I need to start some initiative where we can start just highlighting these people are there and giving them visibility through a supportive community. At that time, I met Huma Mohammed, who was also trying to do something similar. We'd both basically created a Facebook group, and we found each other's Facebook group. We're like, let's just combine now. Like, yeah, good idea.
Right.
And then from there, we just started talking about it. And so we were both going to this Grace Hopper Women in Computing conference that happens every year. It's like the largest conference for women in computing, started by the Anita Borg Institute, and Dr. Telly Whitney is one of the pioneers. We were both like fangirling over her, and so we're like, yeah, let's go there. And Anita Borg Institute, Grace Hopper, they also have this sisters concept where all these different communities have a sisters community. So we're like, let's register as a sister community there. And they have a certain format of how you name the community. So Pakistani women in computing was, there's Nepali women in computing and Irani women in computing and so forth, right? So we were like, let's create ours. And so that's where kind of it began. And then, when people started hearing about it, women, they were reaching out. It was just crazy the amount of women that were reaching out and like that had ideas and millions of ideas. And they're like, hey, I want to go do this in Islamabad. Can I do it? Can I do this in Lahore? Oh, I'm in Ahmedabad. Can I do this? Oh, I'm in Norway. We'd hear from all these women around the world. It was really, really cool. Personally, it was like, okay, yeah, see, there are a lot of us. I was right. And so, yeah, so we registered a nonprofit and we decided to kind of, go big. And then, we started to like just figure out like how do we build a team. And so we did all of that, kind of learned that along the way. And we also learned that different locations had different challenges. So, I think a lot of, like in the US, a lot of the women that I was talking to, they were talking about, they had a career break because they came, maybe it was hard for them to find a job. Maybe the qualifications weren't, equivalent or whatever, or then they had kids or they had parents to look after. And so they had this break and they didn't know how to go back. And so we built some programs around what we call it returnships. So how do you help someone trying to get back into industry after 7, 10, 15-year break? So in other locations, we had other things. So yeah, it was, how do we create a supportive community? How do we share resources with each other? How do we grow together? How do we have a safe space to come talk about things that are difficult for us at work or at home, or balancing things and help each other, like inspire each other by just showing what exists?
These are some of the great initiatives that make you sort of believe in that not every women in corporate will bring down the other women, because, you do see certain cases like that. But then there are communities like these, like the ones that you've created, which do give you the assurance into the idea of sisterhood and raising women rather than the other way around. Another side of the questions, Farah, where I did see that you're going to be volunteering this weekend at a career youth fair with your daughter, right? So, what is it like preparing for moments where you're not just leading at work, but also helping shape your own kids see career leadership and giving back to the community?
I think the first thing is just, being an initiative taker, right? I think a lot of people have ideas and a lot of people want to do things. And, we all have these, what do you call them, drawing room conversations, right? Where we sit and we complain about the state of the world and we complain about the politics and this and that. And then, I think I just am someone who really believes in, okay, if I really am bothered by something and if I can do something about it, like, let's do it, because nobody else is going to. And that's been my experience. Like, I have not had that good fortune of having someone go fix problems for me, or, so I've done that. So I think that behavior of taking initiative, is kind of that first step, because a lot of people, again, goes back to innovation thinking too. You have good ideas, you can pitch it. Who's that person who takes the idea to the next step and then has a persistence to stick with things when they're hard and stick with things when they're in that early growth stage? And then I think it's just having confidence confidence in the ability, like I know what I'm doing, I understand these problems, I know how to execute on it. And then I think for me, like, this thing that you're talking about, it just, again, it started like Pakistani Women in Computing was kind of a passion project. This is kind of a passion project I've been thinking about for a while, and, how to build something for the youth as well. And so initially, actually, we talked about doing something as part of PVIC, like a PVIC youth. And then one of the challenges with that was when we were doing reach outs, we would only get sort of women. And we were trying to do this kind of for everyone, right? The young, it's just as important to educate the young men as it is to educate the young women on some of these things. So the youth initiative really, I wanted it to be kind of very expansive. And so I've been thinking about that. And then, talking to my daughter and kind of seeing the kind of issues that she has, I was like, okay, especially for their social emotional learning, these kids here, they need to see each other as the same concept, right? They're kind of all across, but they're all very different, but there's threads that connect them. And there's things that they're doing that are very inspiring. And how do you build that? How do you show that, oh, this person, there's this one female who she just graduated out of high school, got into John Hopkins for computational neuroscience, right? And I was like, okay, having her come and talk to all these ninth graders, eighth graders, it's going to be so inspiring for them, right? And I can say whatever, but when she talks to them, she speaks their language and she dresses like them and she's cool. It resonates in a different way. So just kind of like this was another passion project. Let's get the youth together and help them build a community for themselves. Then they can talk about what are their problems and how can they help each other. And I think, again, kind of with PVIC as well, like the other behavioral piece here, I guess, is I truly do believe, like I'm a very optimistic person, and I believe that, people want to help each other, that people don't gatekeep for just any reason, right? It's just that we don't know how to ask, or some people don't even know that you need that information, right? Like this girl, like probably nobody had ever asked her, like, can you come talk to a group of kids and tell them about your high school journey and your college application journey and what did you do? And we just asked her and she gave very specific, like, this is what I did and I did this research thing and this is what and kids were asking her like, okay, how do I join that, or how do I do that research, right? So I think it's like amplifying voices and inspiring is important, but also building collaborative communities where we lift each other up, we'll help each other, we create ways, systematic ways to help each other is very important for the next generation and for ourselves if we're growing in our community together. I think in PVIC, for example, there's so many women that, because of this, I got a job or I got my promotion, so that's just lovely to be a part of that, to be able to say, hey, my experience is negative or positive. Once I'm sharing those or helping you, like I told you all the negative experiences so you can avoid that mistake and you can make new mistakes, So I think that's been very helpful. So those are some of the behaviors around really believing in collaboration and believing in amplifying and inspiring voices, community voices.
Yeah, and I believe you're inculcating the same values in your daughters as well. Have you had a chance to work with Gen Z?
Yeah, I mean, read a lot about Gen Z. I don't know, I think they're misunderstood. I don't feel like they're the slacker generation that doesn't want to work or whatever. I just feel like, I mean, again, it's hard to generalize and you shouldn't generalize, but, if I were to generalize, I think they're just much more sure of themselves than we were. I'm kind of a millennial, I think, yeah. I stumbled into a lot of things. I didn't have clarity of purpose. Maybe I didn't have the resources or whatever, but I didn't have that. And they have this clarity of purpose. They kind of know what their values are. They know what's unacceptable to them. They lead with a lot of integrity. So this idea that they don't want to, be a corporate slave doesn't come from them being lazy. I think it comes from them understanding their idea about life is very different. Life is not just about climbing the corporate ladder or making more money. Life is about, living meaningfully and, leaning into your relationships and, having your mental health. I mean, that's actually not a bad idea. It's like, it's kind of, I guess, sad that we can't create workspaces that can also be like that, right? Like why? So maybe it actually makes me hopeful. Maybe the future of the workplace and of the world is going to be gentler because of these people, right? Like who wants to work in an aggressive, cutthroat environment? Nobody does. You can get great at it, but at the cost of a lot of sleep and sanity and mental cycles. If you don't have to, if the way that I talked about community, that's how everything in our life was. It would be amazing, and I think we'd all be doing our best work because you do your best work when you are mentally in a better place, I think. So I like Gen Z.
Yeah, no, I love how honestly you put it all out there, and how you exactly put it together about them giving more value value to their life and morals and not compromising on the corporate slavery values that, millennials adhere to, and they feel that they're okay. But, it's amazing. I've had a lot of lineup of guests, and I've been asking this question from a lot of the people, but you're sort of one of the first guests who has sort of, looked at it from that particular lens. So I absolutely loved your
I
honesty.
think I think it's because, I do like because a lot of gamers are kids, and then as a teacher, I actually get to, see these students come in, and, I see, like, I talk to them, I have long conversations with that group, and then this spring community that I've started, like the high schoolers and then the college plus, very different from us in I think a positive way.
Well, Farah, finally, for anyone sitting on an idea, stuck halfway between R&D and real impact, what's your blunt, no fluff advice for, getting it over the line?
I don't think I'm going to say anything so different than what I've been. We think that innovation has to speak for itself. That's just one big misconception. I'll have a great idea and everybody will see it. That's not true. Ideas don't drive business results. Outcomes do, right? And so unless your idea is backed by strategy, is aligned with strategy, the right incentives are backing it, you're championing it with all the right stakeholders, you're able to go through the messy middle and champion through that. I think that's the way to make it real, right? So you can drive business results with your idea, and you can actually show that it's serving a real customer pain point and it's not just a cool idea for the sake of it. I think there's a space in life for cool ideas for the sake of it, right? And so I think the way that we do it, or the way that I've done it, is, you create like these buckets, like, okay, I'm going to give you a hackathon weekend or a hackathon week. Go try, get all of your innovation, cool ideas out of your system. But then it's like, okay, we want to innovate. It has to start with a business case, not with a research paper, right? And the research paper comes later on how do you implement it. But you don't start with the how, you start with the why. So whenever you're an innovator, you're trying to get an idea pitch, start with the why. Why are you doing this? Who are you doing this for? What's the value you're creating for them? What is the long-term upside to this? And then you go into the how. I think we go into the how and we have the idea, and then we try to do the why. And that's wrong. Like, that's the wrong way out, and you'll just waste a lot of time. If you go with the why, you will also, create a fail fast mechanism. You will kill all the bad ideas much faster, and you will come up with the right idea at the end. So yeah, start with the why.
And any advice for our women listeners in particular, over something that you've also learned the hard way in your career?
I guess lots of things. Say that, I don't second guess yourself. I think one of the things that happens is, all the different inputs coming at you from your personal and professional life. If your interactions, let's say you have 10 interactions in a day and 9 of them are negative, I think you can't help it, but you start becoming a negative person. You start seeing things in a negative light. So just know that, take the time to reset yourself and don't second guess, right? People saying stuff, feedback is just feedback. It's your job whether you take it or not, and what you do with that feedback, right? You know whether the feedback applies to you, and you can apply it if it fits, and if it doesn't, just throw it out. If an opinion doesn't apply, throw it out. You don't have to take everything and keep it with you, right? So throw it away. If it's not serving you, you don't have to put it in your bag. Don't keep that baggage.
Well, Farah, thank you so much for sharing your journey and your insights. It has been just lovely listening to you and your honesty.
Yeah, great talking to you, Rabia. Thanks.